With all the rock and roll, good stuff to eat and high explosives at hand, I was reasonably happy. So when our neighbor, Monsieur Saint-Jour, the oyster fisherman, invited my family out on his peinasse, or oyster boat, I was enthusiastic. At 6 a.m, we boarded Monsieur Saint-Jour's small wooden vessel with our picnic baskets and our sensible footwear. He was a crusty old bastard, dressed like my uncle in ancient denim coveralls, espadrilles, and beret. He had a leathery, tanned, and wind-blown face, hollow cheeks, and the tiny broken blood vessels on nose and cheeks that everyone seemed to have from drinking so much of the local Bordeaux. He hadn't fully briefed his guests on what was involved in these daily travails. We putt-putted out to a buoy marking his underwater oyster park, a fenced-off section of bay bottom, and we sat and sat and sat in the roaring August sun waiting for the tide to go out. The idea was to float the boat over the stockaded fence walls, then sit there until the boat slowly sank with the water level until it rested on the bassin floor. At this point, Monsieur Saint-Jour and his guests, presumably, would rake the oysters, collect a few good specimens for sale in port, and remove any parasites that might be endangering his crop. There was, I recall, still about 2 feet of water left to go before the hull of the boat settled on dry ground and we could walk about the park. We'd already polished off the brie and baguette and downed the Evian, but I was still hungry and characteristically said so. Monsieur Saint-Jour, on hearing this, as if challenging his American passengers, inquired in his thick Gironda accent if any of us would care to try an oyster. My parents hesitated. I doubt they'd realize they might have to actually eat one of the raw, slimy things we were currently floating over. My little brother recoiled in horror. But I, in the proudest moment of my young life, stood up smartly, grinning with defiance, and volunteered to be the first. And in that unforgettably sweet moment in my personal history, that one moment still more alive for me than so many of the other firsts which followed, first pussy, first joint, first day in high school, first published book, or any other thing, I attained glory. Monsieur Saint-Jour beckoned me over to the gunwale, where he leaned over, reached down until his head nearly disappeared underwater, and emerged holding a single silt-encrusted oyster, huge and irregularly shaped, in his rough claw-like fist. With a snubby, rust-covered oyster knife, he popped the thing open and handed it to me, everyone watching now, my little brother shrinking away from this glistening, vaguely sexual-looking object still dripping and nearly alive. I took it in my hand, tilted the shell back into my mouth as instructed by the now beaming Monsieur Saint-Jour, and with one bite and a slurp, wolfed it down. It tasted of seawater, of brine and flesh, and somehow of the future. Everything was different now, everything. I'd not only survived, I'd enjoyed. This, I knew, was the magic I had until now been only dimly and spitefully aware of. I was hooked. My parents' shudders, my little brother's expression of unrestrained revulsion and amazement only reinforced the sense that I had somehow become a man. I had had an adventure, tasted forbidden fruit, and everything that followed in my life, the food, the long and often stupid and self-destructive chase for the next thing, whether it was drugs or sex or some other new sensation, would all stem from this moment. I'd learned something, viscerally, instinctively, spiritually, even in some small precursive way sexually, and there was no turning back. The genie was out of the bottle. My life as a cook and as a chef had begun. Food had power. It could inspire, astonish, shock, excite, delight, and impress. It had the power to please me and others. This was valuable information. For the rest of that summer and in later summers, I'd often slip off by myself to the little stands by the port, where one could buy brown paper bags of unwashed, black-covered oysters by the dozen. After a few lessons from my new soulmate, blood brother, and bestest buddy, Monsieur Saint-Jour, who was now sharing his after-work bowls of sugared Van Ordinaire with me, I could easily open the oysters by myself, coming in from behind with the knife and popping the hinge like it was Aladdin's cave. I'd sit in the garden among the tomatoes and the lizards and eat my oysters and drink Kronenbergs. France was a wonderland for underage drinkers, happily reading Modesty Blaise and the Katzenjammer Kids and the lovely hardbound bande dessinée in French, until the pictures swam in front of my eyes, smoking the occasional pilfer jeton. And I still associate the taste of oysters with those heady, wonderful days of illicit late-afternoon buzzes, the smell of French cigarettes, the taste of beer, that unforgettable feeling of doing something I shouldn't be doing. I had as yet no plans to cook professionally, but I frequently look back at my life, searching for that fork in the road, trying to figure out where exactly I went bad, I became a thrill-seeking, pleasure-hungry sensualist, always looking to shock, amuse, terrify, and manipulate, seeking to fill that empty spot in my soul with something new. I like to think it was Monsieur Saint-Jeur's fault, but of course it was me all along.